All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on AI and the future of fundraising. I'm Skip Castrol, Senior Director of Insights and Analytics here at Amphil. Just a little bit about us and C4CS in general. Amphil's a leading provider of integrated professional services and dedicated to strengthening civil society by helping mission-driven enterprises flourish. We are excited to explore with you today how AI is shaping the landscape of nonprofit fundraising and what it means for the future of the sector. Um, I'd like to just take a quick moment and acknowledge the organization that makes this webinar possible. This Givers, Doers, and Thinkers webinar is sponsored by Center for Civil Society, also known in shorthand as C4CS. They were founded in 2021, kind of as a project of Amphil, and now they are an independent nonprofit. They stand on the front lines on the fight to restore American civil society. And so they sponsor dozens of webinars, masterclasses, Scotch Talks, lots of other programs each year. And you can learn more about the center's upcoming events at centerforcivilsociety.org/events. Some housekeeping and then some intros, and then we'll talk to some really great folks. Want to encourage you to put any questions and comments you have for our guests into the chat box during today's webinar. I will do my level best to monitor that, as will a few of my colleagues that are here too. And so we'll try to get to those questions. If we talk all the way to the end, then any questions you put in, we'll get some answers back to you afterwards. So don't think that you'll be left hanging. So please encourage those questions and we'll interact with them as much as we can. So that's enough housekeeping. Today, I'm joined by Sean Olds, technology thought leader who helped co-found and build Boodle AI. He's found a lot of success in both private and government sectors and continues to dedicate his time to supporting nonprofit organizations and their missions. He served on nonprofit boards for 30 years. In 2020, he was appointed as a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. He holds a BS in computer science from the Military Academy, an MBA from Kellogg, and a JD from Northwestern School of Law. So I can ask him questions about how to get out of tickets. I'm also joined by Nathan Chappell, thought leader, public speaker, and AI inventor. He's also an author. He's one of the world's foremost experts on the intersection of artificial intelligence and generosity. He recently published a book called The Generosity Crisis, which the link is in the chat, and you can see a picture of it right behind him as well. So it's been dubbed as required reading for a lot of professionals in this area. So that's good to hear. He serves as a senior vice president at Donor Search AI. In 2019, he founded Fundraising AI, which is an advocacy organization focused on the responsible and beneficial use of AI for the global fundraising community. Really, really superb organization that puts on some really great events. He's also the co-host of a weekly fundraising AI podcast, one of the pretty big nonprofit technology podcasts out there. So with that, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. We'll dive right into some questions. I'll start one for you, Nathan, and Sean, you can chime in as well. Nathan, could you kind of help us understand kind of the broader landscape of AI beyond just generative AI? I think many people tend to equate AI only with generative models, and sometimes myself included, but there's much more of an extensive toolbox of AI technologies out there. Can you give us kind of like a high-level overview of what AI encompasses, maybe some of its different specialized applications, and maybe touch on what AI is capable of today versus some common misconceptions about it? So that was a lot of questions in one, but kind of giving us a level setting for us, so to speak.
And I know Sean will have plenty to share on this too. He and I actually were on the call earlier today. Our paths intersect a lot, and over the years have overlapped a lot. And I'll use his sentiment that he and I were doing AI before it was cool. It is funny because when we think about, AI and the history of AI goes far, far back. 1955 is actually when the term was kind of coined, but it wasn't, I don't know, 2017 for me was my first introduction to real machine learning. And I think Sean was before that, but it was super nerdy. It was this, very high level math, not very transparent. You had to learn a lot of things on, not just how to build models, but how to evaluate models and understand what they were doing. So the that nerdier part, I still actually enjoy a lot, and that's what I do for my day to day is actually on the what is considered predictive AI side, taking lots of data, distilling it down into small amounts of data. That's an area that people know the terms machine learning and deep learning. And at the time, natural language processing was essentially taking text and translating it into voice or voice into text. But those were kind of the main domains for a long time. And that's where a lot of organizations got really good at predicting who is most likely to upgrade their cell phone or who is most likely to buy something on Amazon and what were they likely to buy. So that area of predictive, AI has, really made a lot of progress over a few decades. Nonprofit sector, not surprisingly, was very kind of slow to the game there, and really looking at like we've got tons of data, and that was my orientation was at a cancer hospital, tons of cancer data, patient data of like who is going to see a doctor and how often, and inpatient or outpatient, then their charitable giving data, and actually taking all that data and distilling it down into small amounts. That's where we started working. But in November 30th, 2022 was when ChatGPT, which Sean and I had already been, tracking, and I think probably Sean, you were using GPTs before OpenAI released Chat, but it really made AI extremely affordable and accessible. And I think to your point, Skip, I think most people who think about AI today, that's their only orientation is like, oh, it's this thing called, ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or Gemini or Perplexity, these tools, or like Grammarly or Canva. They think about it in these like very practical use cases. So I know that was very, very broad and very quick. AI stands for everything and nothing at this point. And lots of people, including Sam Altman and Elon Musk, like to claim that they created AI. And then you have Jeffrey Hinton, who actually created AI, says he created AI. So it's confusing for a lot of people. I think all that to say is that it is in some ways everything and nothing. It just represents a body of technology that resembles and does things that once only humans did. And it essentially resembles a tool that augments, work that humans do. So, Sean, keep me honest on all of that.
No, you're great. I'll add just a little bit of an anecdote. And as Nathan knows, Boodle started as very traditional AI, doing predictive analytics. And I jokingly sometimes say one of the reasons we've done the pivot into the generative space is I basically was getting a very soft forehead, beating my head against the wall, trying to convince nonprofits that AI was not the Terminator coming after them, that it could do well. And the anecdote I would share with you and kind of the difference within the philanthropic space is it was very hard with traditional AI to get nonprofits to adopt. I remember in March of 23, so 5 months after ChatGPT came out, Nathan, you gave a speech at the AFP conference in New Orleans. It was the only speech with the word ChatGPT in it. There were, I think, 80 different sessions, and that was the only one. And I remember showing up 3 minutes before because I knew how AI sessions go, and there would be like 10 people in the front seats and the rest of the room would be empty. And that room was standing room only. It was one of the most well-attended sessions because the nonprofit community adopted it. And one of the big reasons I attribute that to is that for years, for decades, and as you talked, Skip, I graduated with a computer science degree. So every nonprofit board I went on, I was the default tech committee. And almost every technology platform for 5 decades now that a nonprofit would want to buy has been bought in a very expensive enterprise license. And so that means that's months, if not quarters, of debate and going back and forth and deciding what they're going to do. In really inefficiently run organizations, it was an ED and board decision without actually talking to the frontline operators who would be using the technology. So it was always coming from the top down. Anybody sitting in any nonprofit today can log into ChatGPT, into Claude, into Gemini, into Boodle for free. They don't have to put a credit card down and they can start using it. And when they do, they can start to drive change from the bottom up. And so that's been the big change, I think, in the nonprofit space and the adoption. And what gets me excited is I hate to term it this way, but it's kind of a gateway drug. It is a way into AI where people start to realize, oh, this isn't such a bad thing. And what that's going to lead to, and there's a lot of opportunities there when it comes to fundraising and just operations in general, is all of the traditional AI that nonprofits can avail themselves of.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. I really like that the short description you gave of how it augments things. I think that's something that people can see a lot of with there. Sean, building a bit on kind of the implementation, nonprofits have faced their own unique challenges when it comes to implementing AI solutions or how to properly augment AI solutions into their operations. Can you maybe chat through a couple of like pretty significant hurdles that they have when trying to integrate AI? And any strategies or best practices you could think of that would help some nonprofits overcome these obstacles and leverage AI.
Absolutely. And I want to delineate the difference between AI and Gen AI, because taking in what Boodle historically did, what donor search does with AI, they're not insignificant tasks. And I think one of the big problems where generative AI has not been adopted is people hear AI, they think complicated. They hear software, they think Salesforce integration. We're going to have project planning meetings. We're going to have to do big trainings. So my recommendation to nonprofits, if they're doing nothing, is embrace generative AI with the right expectations. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to change your life on day one. But if you invest time over 30 days, 10 to 15 minutes a day, it's almost like in 1995 getting access to the internet, right? You slowly, day one's not going to change your entire life, but after 30 days, you start to realize all the amazing things it can do and all of the resources it has. And so for nonprofits that are doing nothing today, it's just give your team access to generative AI, whatever platform it may be, and give them the chance to understand where in their daily workflows it works. Because the reality is, and this isn't just nonprofits, this is commercial too, we as knowledge workers don't have the muscle memory to use this technology yet. Our muscle memory when we have a problem is to go to Google or for me to call Nathan and get an answer, right? We need to build that muscle memory into our individual daily workflows, and then that will help the enterprise at large. And then once they do that, they can start to explore the more traditional AIs and be more comfortable in the return on investment they're going to get, because that does take a little bit more time to bring into the organization. And it is going to cost the organization a little bit more. But again, that ROI is going to be there.
Awesome. Thank you. And any, as like a little bit of a side quest question, any thoughts on like guardrails and guidelines? I think I hear that a lot from folks and think, well, I don't want to just give folks access to AI, then all my data is everywhere. And so I think it's also maybe important to think through what are some things you do and don't do in any Gen AI.
Yeah, actually, Nathan, I'm going to pass this to you because you've really, I mean, not really, you have led the establishment of fundraising AI. And I know in the speeches that you give, both corporations and nonprofits have none of those guardrails in place or don't have the policies in place. So I'd rather you answer it because you've got a lot more experience there.
Yeah, I mean, I know we both are at the same intersection, where, well, one is I think we have to first understand that the nonprofit sector is unique and special in the sense that we operate in the currency of trust. Therefore, a framework for what is responsible in the nonprofit sector, by definition, can't look the same as Microsoft or Amazon or Google. That by definition, those organizations have financial incentives that will always drive scale over safety. In fact, OpenAI, they talk about safety a lot. Microsoft talks about responsible AI a lot. But like even OpenAI spends, for every dollar they spend on safety, they spend $1,000 on scale. So, I mean, there's just a massive delta. So I think that calls the question of like, okay, well, if nonprofit sector, we know that we need to glean the ROI of AI. So we need to do things, faster. We need to do them more accurately. We need to do them, with less burnout. And that's really what AI, both predictive and generative, stand for. Essentially, it's around efficiency and efficacy for organizations. Is that we have to really understand that as a nonprofit sector, we have to hold ourselves accountable and each other accountable to a higher level of role and responsibility of how we use these tools, not just in an ethical way, but in a way that will be beneficial for the long term. And the real easy thing for us to recognize is that there are things in our lives that are ethical, but also not beneficial. And the easiest one for us to look at from a technological perspective is social media, which when created was intended to be the great community builder of all community builders, and that we would all be, friends, and we would know each other all over the world, and we would be united in this new and unique way. And fast forward, we've seen that technology, while not unethical, has had lots of unintended consequences. And, you know, and big ones like, you know, the happiness crisis or the loneliness epidemic or the anxiety and depression and teen suicide and all those things that are very well documented. I think so that's where the nonprofit sector has to hold this balance that every person's responsible for responsible AI, that ethics are a minimum standard. That is not the ultimate standard. We have to recognize that if you're not paying for the product, you probably are the product. And so it's upon every person, you know, and just because I buy a Volvo because they're supposed to be, you know, one of the safest cars out there, I can't get in there and drive it recklessly and still be safe. And so the same thing is like understand your privacy settings, understand what's being used and what's not being used. But I mean, Sean probably can speak to this too. I think one of the largest deterrents of people who aren't using specifically generative AI right now is because they either will claim it's not safe or it's not private, which is wholly untrue for the most part, largely untrue. But it still is incumbent upon us as individuals in our sector to prioritize trust, to ensure that we're using these tools in an ethical and responsible way, not just to drive short-term results, but also to ensure that we minimize unintended consequences long term. We don't want to become more socially isolated because of our use of AI. We don't want our ability to think critically to be so diminished that we just, you know, we have no ability to actually navigate life. And so I think our sector is unique and I think special in this way of like, use these tools, use them in a really responsive way, drive and amplify your mission in like ways never before possible, but do it in a way that is representative of the values of your organization, not the values of an organization that's selling a product to you.
And if I can add just real quick to the end of that, part of that responsibly using it is using it. I get probably once a week someone who would tell me they're not going to use it on principle because it's not doing the right thing or it's wasting energy. And there's a gentleman named Dr. Max Tegmark in Boston who wrote a book called Life 3.0. And one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase, but one of my favorite things he says in there is, we invented fire, we really messed it up, and then we invented fire extinguishers, fire alarms, fire trucks, and fire stations. We have a responsibility to build the fire alarms, the fire extinguishers, and everything else for AI, because no one is advocating that we need to get rid of fire, and every year fire does damage. AI is going to do damage every year. But what we need to do is make sure we're putting things in place to mitigate that and accentuate all the positive that AI can bring us as an industry.
And I will say, I actually shared this with the group yesterday, is in the same way that we were talking about the internet, Sean was talking about the internet, you know, in this day and age, if you as an organization by principle said we're not going to use the internet in our nonprofit anymore because, you know, it's got unintended consequences and people, you know, there's a lot of hate and fake news and all these things on the internet. We don't believe in it in principle. We're not going to use it. I mean, how surprised would we be if donors said, I'm not donating to you because you are not using the tools that are available to you to become efficient and drive your mission? I 100% believe that it is fully, to Sean's words, like irresponsible to not use this tool. And there will be a day that in the same way that people look at the internet, that they will say, if you're not leveraging the tools that are readily available to you to drive your mission efficiently, I will not donate to you. And I'd rather donate to an organization that will. I think that day is coming and it's not far off. And we can look, our crystal ball is very clear on this in the same way we look at that.
Thank you. Great thoughts. Thinking maybe a little bit broader, like where would you, either one of you, say where the nonprofit sector like currently stands in terms of AI adoption? I tend to polarize it and think, well, everybody's in it or everybody's out of it, and that's usually not an either or case. But where would you guys, if someone asked you, which is me, where do you think the nonprofits stand with this AI? What would you guys say?
I'd go back to the anecdote I shared. I think in AI adoption, traditional AI, they're still laggards. But I think in generative AI adoption, I mean, that room just 5 months after ChatGPT came out, Nathan asked the question the first 60 seconds, how many of you have used ChatGPT? And over 90% of the hands went up. And everywhere I go, people have used it. Now, there's a big difference between using and adopting. You know, there are people who use it for the 3 hard emails they need to do a month, or they use it to do a proof of 1 grant. they haven't really adopted it into their daily workflows to figure out the other places. And so, and that's true in the for-profit space too. End of last year, McKinsey did a study, said that less than 10% of the North American workforce had actually adopted generative AI. Now, in just 7 months, that number has over doubled, almost tripled.
Mhm.
But I think that you're seeing that same growth in the nonprofit space. And I think it will continue to grow, especially to Nathan's point. While nonprofits don't like to see themselves as competitive, they do realize they're competing for dollars. And they have to realize that if another organization is able to do things faster, better, more efficiently, and more effectively, their donors are gonna seed over there rather than stay with them.
I do say I like the word adoption because it goes beyond, just use, so that really represents for me when I ask people, or organizations like are using AI, you have to qualify that because of course anyone who knows anything about AI, which most people that unless you live under a rock know that you're using AI in everything you do, right? I mean, what average person interacts with around 5,000 algorithms per day this year. So, I mean, it's AI is immersed in everything in tools like tool Grammarly and Canva and all those that people are like, oh yeah, well I use AI, but there's a difference between actively and passively using AI, and it's a very big difference in having an AI strategy, where essentially that we look at even a week ago or 2 weeks ago, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley came out publicly to say that they were going to be AI first financial institutions, meaning that they had very clear specific measurable objectives to what AI would do for their organizations to serve their customers better, to serve their employees better, to increase productivity. When we talk about that level of like being an AI first organization, we're talking like, I'd say less than 5%. Organizations have a documented AI strategy at this point of like, I want to have every employee, I want to save 20% of every FTE's staff time or make them 20% more efficient in the next 2 years. A lot of them are diving in, and to Sean's point, like even if they don't have a strategy, their employees are using it because they found the value in being able to do their work better, faster, and be happier because of that. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity in our sector to say, okay, this is all great and this is transformative. Like, let's pick the tools that align with our values, but let's also now figure out like how do we double down on that and then in say in 2 years increase productivity by 20% or 30% or 40. I mean, the private sector is around 50% is what the benchmark is. How do we do that? And then more importantly, what do we do with that dividend of time? Like, because if in the nonprofit sector, if you save 20% of every FTE's staff time, that's 1 day a week that a person could do very human centric things like call someone, heaven forbid, and just check on them or their grandkids or have lunch with a donor or, start your morning and write a bunch of, notes to donors you care about and you didn't have time to before that. And so I think I think we're faced with some of those questions right now, but I think those are really exciting questions. Like let's have a deliberate strategy on how we want to leverage this. And and Sean works a lot of enterprise level clients, so they're probably thinking about this a bit more robustly. But the small nonprofits are just using this like, how do I breathe? Like, how do I use this tool to just breathe a little bit better and not work till 10 o'clock every night of the week? I mean, those are important things too. I think we're just at the very beginning of this AI transformation.
That's great. I really like the point about it's more than just saving time. It's like, what are you doing with that time? I've worked with a handful of folks in higher education, the nonprofit sector, and elsewhere, and I found that generally people, when given more time, are going to do what they think is practical versus what is necessarily ideal. Sometimes those are the same.
Mm.
But having a actual strategy helps inform folks like the reason we're doing this is this so that you can do these things that we think are also practical and valuable. So I think it's a really great point thinking through more than just time savings because save time, but what are you going to do with it? So it's really great. Sean, thinking about this potential that we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes of AI and nonprofit fundraising, do you have any kind of real world examples that you've seen about how, so like maybe some notable case studies of how AI has successfully been adopted or implemented in like a nonprofit fundraising campaign and what impact it's made?
Absolutely. And I've had the fortune over the past 8 years to see both AI and Gen AI have a very significant impact. On the AI side, being able to build predictive models of certain types of donors and being able to build those models on a completely automated basis. And so now an organization can take their major gift donors, their monthly recurring donors, their donors who have donated 5 times, and build all these multiple models, and then do one of two things: either apply them to the rest of their database, right? So we used to do with organizations what we called a hidden gems. So we would build a model of their major gift donors, then apply it to all of their rest of their donor database, and almost always would find at least one or two donors that were giving $100 a month. In one case, we had organization had been getting $100 a year from a donor for 8 years. They went to him with a major gift ask, and he made a $25,000 donation the first time they asked for a major gift. But because of the way they had their donor pyramid set up and the progressions that they went through, all this individual ever got was a, hey, will you give another $100? Will you give another $100? And so it's being able to illuminate out of people who come in very quickly and treat them as individuals rather than just a generic new cohort of donors who came in. On the generative AI side, it's been fascinating. One of the favorite parts of being an entrepreneur is when your customers teach you how to use your platform. And so we actually had a major gift officer at a major university who came to us and took one of our bots, and this is not what we had intended it for, but she figured out that she could upload information about all of her potential new major gift donor meetings. And so over 2 months, she met with 12 donors. She took their LinkedIn profiles, their board bios, everything else. She uploaded it into the role-playing bot, and then she asked the role-playing bot to take on the role of that person and did a 30-minute practice meeting. She said in all 12 cases, it came up with 12 unique set of questions. So it wasn't just generic major gift questions. She said in 2 of the cases, it asked her questions she's never been asked before as a fundraiser. And both those questions came up with those donors. And so there's a real power in as I mentioned earlier, organizations and individuals in organizations being able to find how this fits in their daily workflow and what it does and how it ultimately benefits the entire organization.
That's pretty awesome. Any examples coming to mind for you, Nathan?
I mean, yeah, similar to Sean. I mean, this is all we do, right? So since 2017, focused on really driving precision through predictive AI. So, organizations, especially large organizations that just have too much data. The reality is, like, you have a lot of hypothesis about what makes a good prospect or what makes a good donor. A lot of it's based on years of experience and intuition, but there's a lot of math behind that. And so, we were really excited in the very beginning to essentially quantify the true like motivations for giving. And so, the organizations that we work with every day essentially have just far too much data to really make sense of to really weed through. If you have 1 million constituents, how do you get down to, 1,000 that are essentially raising their hand, waiting for you to ask them for a gift? So yeah, we see use cases every single day. I mean, it's amazing. And then, going all the way down. So we get to like custom machine learning and deep learning all the way down to more aggregated. So lots of great examples there driving a lot of efficiency. I think one of the most creative examples I've seen in Gen AI side is a nonprofit in Toronto called Furniture Bank. And I know, Sean, you probably met Dan Kershaw, but just a guy who has 3 or 4 employees. They deliver furniture to people who literally have kids who like sleep on the floor, and which obviously is not good for a lot of reasons. And without the budget to hire a photographer or an artist or anything else, started using generative to create images depicting what it would be like for this child to live on a floor, but also being sensitive to the transparency and not wanting, poverty porn to like exasperate this and not leverage the tool to manipulate people. He created a very large caption that said, this photo isn't real, but reality is, and the story is. And you see examples from specifically small nonprofits, which is where my history is back 20 years ago when I started very small nonprofits. You see them level up in ways like far greater than what should have been their potential, prior to generative AI. Like they now portray themselves as mid-size or even large organizations because now they have a fundraising coach, like Sean was just saying. Now they have a an analyst. Now they have an image curator, and they have all these things, and a grant writer. I think the greatest potential for AI now is honestly small, scrappy nonprofits that have the greatest need. That, innovation comes from areas where there's the greatest need. And if those organizations lean in, figure out how to like leverage the tool, and even Sean's example is perfect, because like that's where the need was greatest. I need a tool to act as a person to, role play with me. I think that's where it's just like so much potential. We could sit here in 2 years from now and be like, oh my gosh, we only saw like 1% of it. I think we'll probably sit back and be like, we were only scratching the surface back in 2024, and look what has transpired since then.
That's amazing. A lot of great examples. Dan in the chat poses a question, and I'll just read it for you guys. So, what are some concrete examples of how these promises of efficiency coming from AI are actually being seen in current nonprofit organizations? Sean, you mind tackling that one for us?
Can I actually, am I able to share? Can I share something real quick?
Sure. If you have, if not, we can figure out how to get you to share it.
Can you see that?
Yep.
So one of the things we do every month for teams of 10 or more is show them how they've been using the platform. And so this was a 60-person nonprofit. They gave 16 people to a pilot. These people came from development, finance, marketing, and events. What was great is 8 of these people had never used generative AI at all, not even logged into ChatGPT to create a haiku about their bowling team. By the end of the month, all 16 were using it weekly. Now, because some of them were new, they only used it for about 27 hours in the month, but they documented 372 hours of productive work that they produced. So for a small 16-person team, it was the equivalent of adding 2 people. Or a better way to look at it is, for a 16-person team spending $300 on their license, they were empowered to produce almost $20,000 more work than they had in the previous month. I hope that answers the question, Dan.
Yeah, it's pretty specific.
Yeah. And like each organization is going to define efficiency in a different way. I think financial efficiency is a pretty big one, but those are some pretty real concrete examples of like actual dollars saved and time saved.
I will say, when we think about the ROI of AI, of course, dollar saved, time saved, but the ancillary benefits that, and this almost every university has done the study now where they do control tests of like, group A gets to use generative AI, group 2 just gets to use the old school internet. And, and McKinsey and Deloitte have done this with white collar workers. It's always the same result, is that, those that use AI do their work better, so more accurately. They do it faster, not surprisingly, but at the end they have a higher degree of work satisfaction, so essentially they're happier. And if you think about a sector that could benefit from better, faster, happier, like there's like AI and nonprofits go together like peanut butter and jelly. There's just like no better sector to see, where a group of hardworking, passionate people that probably have, bad boundaries, because we wake up every day, saving the world, and it's hard to say no. So, this idea of doing your work better, faster, and happier is just like, it's amazing. So, and then you get to see those results, from actually the productivity that you gain, quantifiably. It's totally amazing.
Oh, that's all really exciting to hear. Um, Maybe going a bit more specific, how do you guys think Gen AI could be leveraged by nonprofits to kind of enhance donor understanding and donor engagement? Sean, you touched on this a little bit earlier too. And do you think AI, or how do you think AI could be used to create like more like personalized and effective fundraising campaigns? Kind of getting into the weeds here a bit.
Sure. I mean, so donor engagement and donor understanding. On the donor engagement side, again, client teaching us how to use our platform. They only have, I mean, I say only, so this would be big for some organizations, but they have about 2,000 donors in their donor database. They've taken very good notes in there, right? So they know that, Bob likes stamp collecting and Jane is into wine, right? And they've got all these notes. So she took an export of their CRM with all that information, put it into generative AI, and then asked it to write 10 personalized emails. And she also loaded in all the accomplishments the organization has done over the 12 months and asked it to pull from there things that would resonate with these people. And then asked it to create an image that was personalized to that donor, because people like, emails with images. She walks in the morning, she's got 10 brand new emails that are all personalized. They're not asking for money. but they're personalized to the individual. Now she's got to go through, because if the person's name is Elizabeth and she goes by Liz, she's going to be in the donor database as Elizabeth. She needs to change that so it doesn't look like it came from a machine. But those emails, 10 of those emails probably take her a couple of hours to write from scratch every morning. Now she spends about 15 minutes proofreading it and sending them out. She said in her first 30 days, over 20% of them made unsolicited donations. And she's able now every day, 10 emails a day, 50 a week, 200 a month, that she's able to push out. And so it's a nice way to be able to personalize, do more with spending less time. On the understanding side, one unique example we saw is a very medically driven organization that has to convey to their donors and their constituents very complicated medical studies and everything else. Literally able to take a 50-page medical study and write, okay, summarize this to a college graduate, summarize this to a college student, summarize this to a 10th grader. And literally in 30 seconds each, you get 3 different summaries, but all written at a level where that individual is going to understand it. And so now being able to take very complex ideas and to get your donors or your constituents to understand it better, you're not having to take hours to figure out how to do that. You're able to do it in just seconds.
Excellent. I harkening back to Nathan's comment earlier on the far too much data. I've talked to a lot of folks, and I think that's a pretty common thing where people are just like, we've got all this data in system A, system B, system C, and so much that they don't know what to do with it. And it seems like in the past, the options have been, well, let's hire a data scientist for $100,000 a year to do something exciting for us. Whereas now you can do a lot of that much simpler in a handful of different systems and a lot of great things. And Sean, you make a really good point of the continued need for a human touch. I've seen AI used, and I've used it enough that I can almost tell when something has been written and unaltered. It has its own unique cadence to it. That may change in a couple of months, in a couple of weeks, in a couple of years, but at least for now,
Couple days.
yeah, you can largely tell when someone is used it. So you still need that element, but it gives you ideas, it gives you prompts that you hadn't thought of, it gives you good questions, and you can do unique things. One of the questions that popped up in the Q&A just now talks about how can you use AI to help tailor kind of ask materials and case for support by various segmentation options. And Sean, you touched on that just a little bit, because you can do that. You can say, I'd like a help me with an age group of 60 to 70, and how do I ask those people that live in Southeast United States than this current area. And the more details you give it, the more potential good information it can give you. It could also give you a bunch of garbage. So a lot of great things that are out there. Nathan, any thoughts? I can kind of see.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, I mean, I think this is where there's tremendous opportunity when, when we look at the advent of predictive AI, which is around precision, and then we look at generative AI, which is about creation. And then we kind of like predictive AI by itself doesn't do anything, right? It's just kind of, it's a score, and it might make you feel good because like I know more about my donors now, but it's not capable of doing anything on its own. Generative AI can create at scale. So if you put those two things together, now you've got the ability to create with this tremendous amount of personalization. It's a word or a phrase that we've used, precision philanthropy, since like 2017, where we think about precision medicine and this idea that every person is an individual with individual data behind them, and your medical treatment's tailored toward that. The same way precision philanthropy no longer, it looks at every individual uniquely to say, this person is likely to make a gift, and these are the characteristics of that person that can drive from the data. I do think it, when Sean was speaking, and he was talking about a client with 2,000 constituents and good data. I think that's an important part, because other people also think, well, I don't have good data, therefore AI is not useful for me. I think your path starts today. If that's you, that data is no longer a luxury, that AI is just a large feedback loop. Both predictive AI and generative AI are a feedback loop. The more data you have, the better data you have, the better they will perform. It doesn't mean you have to wait to start. It means that you're never ready to start, but you're also never done. And there's a lot of freedom in that. When I realized that many years ago, I'm like, I'm not ready. I knew I wasn't ready, but I also will never be done because it'll be part of the feedback loop. Every person, fundraiser, A, B, C, prospect researcher, gift processing person is part of that feedback loop. I think organizations, if there was one thing that you wanted to do in the age of AI, is make data a strategy and ensure that everyone understands that's just not a luxury and you don't just do it haphazardly. That, if somebody is called Liz, then document that as a preferred salutation, that she goes by Liz, because you'll be able to generate that very quickly, and that's just going to save you time in the future. And so, but that's very actionable. It costs like no money. It requires a new orientation around, like, contact reports aren't just something that's, a good citizen files because if they win the lottery tomorrow, they're going to say, peace out, nice to know you, that you file contact reports because it's informing that next best action continuously. And so I think there's something for organizations could do literally today and should do, because we're not going to become less reliant on AI in the future. We'll become continually more reliant on AI in the future in those decisions.
Really great points. It reminds me of a comment a mentor of mine told me in late high school, early college. I had asked him at one point, it's like, when were you ready to have kids? And he looked at me and he said, Skip, you're never ready to have kids. If you wait till you're ready, you're just never going to have them.
Mhm.
And folks that have had kids, probably feel most of the same way. So that's a really good point. I also really appreciated the interpreting versus creation. I've been in more meetings than I want to count where I interpret a bunch of data for folks, and then they look at me and they say, well, so what? And then there's kind of like this quiet and awkward pause where people are looking around like, well, so what? Like, what do we do with this? And that's often incumbent on the people that asked you for the data sometimes, like have them make those decisions. But
Mhm.
being able to provide some solutions and do some creation, I think that is where Gen AI can bring in a lot of that power and lead into kind of like that precision philanthropy that you
Mhm.
mentioned as well. A lot of really great points. Lastly-ish, we may have some other rabbit trails. We may have a few other questions pop up. How can smaller nonprofits, the scrappy ones that you guys mentioned, with pretty limited resources to leverage AI, help improve their fundraising efforts? I'll let Nathan take that one.
I think both of us, and we've seen this just literally time and again. And all I have to do is put on my hat. In the year 2000, I was the accidental fundraiser. That I was a board member at a local Boys and Girls Club, and my third board meeting, I was going to grad school at the time. The executive director quit and said that she was moving to Idaho and kind of peace out. And I was naive enough to not say no, and I kind of stepped into this role I knew nothing about. But I did value, what technology could do to like help. And so, created our own little database and created a website. We didn't have one at the time. And so I just, if I wear that hat, I think about, it's so easy for me to put myself in that role and be like, oh my gosh, like I think, Sean, I think you said irresponsible not to use it. Like, I could not imagine in some ways, and I hope I don't go back in time because I've already lived that life once, but in some ways, I wish I was that director of a small nonprofit right now, because I would crush it. Like, just understanding and exploiting this technology. Essentially, I really believe in this idea, and I think it's Ethan Mollick's sentiment, is that always bring AI to the table and essentially have it prove to you things that it can't do, versus just only kind of working marginally on the things that you've heard. I think our biggest limitation is our own creativity and our own curiosity. I think even more of just like, what can this do? Small nonprofits, I have such a huge advantage because they don't have bureaucracy. They don't have to go through all their like AI committees now and go through all the stuff. It's just like literally Nike, just do it. Learn from each other, listen to a podcast like Fundraising AI or others, follow Ali Miller on LinkedIn or other people that are doing basic training. But oh my gosh, I think there's unlimited potential for small nonprofits right now that can use this tool to, I mean, it'd be irresponsible for me to even say the ways, because there are literally endless ways for nonprofits to, generate content, from video to audio to images to text, in both ways, grants, review things, do analysis, look at financials. Like, all of these things are at individuals' disposal. And I would argue this is the biggest technological revolution that we've had in 100 years. And people argue with me about the internet, and some other, in electricity, but this has potential to change everything for organizations. And if we believe that our missions are worth it, that our sector is worth it, the future of humanity, and a decreasing inequity is worth it, then it's incumbent upon us to just do it.
I think the just do it sentiment is exact. I mean, I struggled a lot with our legacy platform in traditional AI because it was not inexpensive. And so that small nonprofit, that was a big decision. There is no excuse for any nonprofit. Generative AI at a base level is free. And then when you start to see how much it does cost to use it, when you're talking about $20 a person a month, for the benefit you get. The other side of it is, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, is the use of AI, not even just in fundraising, but in the operations of what you do as an organization, is actually going to help drive fundraising, because donors will feel like you're being more efficient. So two great examples I love. One is United Refugees. A decade ago, they literally used to send 12-person teams out to refugee camps with these big binders full of pictures. And you were paying for 12 people to sit at a refugee camp for 30 days and just thumb through pictures. Now they can send a 2-person team out for about 72 hours with an iPad using a branch of artificial intelligence known as facial recognition, and they're making 100x the number of matches they used to make. So now when you go to 10 years ago to a donor, they would tell them, $100 is going to let us get one match. Now they can go to a donor and say, hey, $100 is going to let us get 100 matches. That donor feels like they're making an investment that's getting an ROI. The Teen Tech Suicide Hotline did the same thing using natural language processing. And so as you use these technologies, not just specifically in fundraising, but in operations, it's going to help make the fundraising department's job even easier.
Really good thoughts. Another question, a bit of a surprise one. So if you think back to the early days of the internet, and Nathan, you brought this up just a touch, there was kind of this golden age where early adopters who launched were able to kind of gobble up the market share, like late 90s-ish. But that crashed when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. Do you think this is kind of the golden age of AI, where companies are going to exploit the early adopter status? And do you think there's going to be a crash later on, and all that advantage kind of goes away or gets better? Any thoughts on that?
Sean and I might have very different answers, because this is a big question, and you can look at it from a lot of different angles. I think one is that we equate this technology to technological advances like the internet, but it's nothing like the internet. And so the reality is the internet, from when it was created to when the the bubble burst, was operated exactly the same way. And in 2024, it operates exactly the same way. So AI is considered an exponential technology, and some people would consider it a double exponential technology, because AI now creates AI. So the speed at which it changes and advances happen is faster and more profound than anything we've ever experienced in human history. And it will be on us to really understand how quickly humans can change. So I think it's a hard comparison from the internet. But of course, the internet burst because it was overvalued, because it looked like there was this new business model. I do think that there'll be a lot of consolidation. The models are extremely expensive. They're getting more expensive. I mean, GPT-5, I think it's rumored to cost $7 billion to build GPT-5. So that's not sustainable. The arms race on GPUs is insane. The need for electricity to provide compute is not sustainable. So I do think there'll be a level setting. And with that said, I think like any technological adoption life cycle, there's the early adopters, and then cross the chasm, and then you go to the the main people. Those that are using AI now and learning how to leverage the tool and kind of breaking barriers, if you will, do have a distinct advantage for now. And I don't think that continues forever when AI becomes ubiquitous in all things, everything, and that kind of diminishes. So someone asked me 2 days ago, is it still too late to become an AI expert? And I'm like, it's green in the nonprofit sector. It's greenfield right now. There is a lot of opportunity, but that opportunity will diminish over time as AI becomes assimilated into everyone's everyday life. And in 2 years, it might even be silly to have this conversation because we'd be like AI is just everywhere in everything we do. I don't know, Sean, do you take it from different lenses?
No, not at all. And I mean, the only thing I would say is the internet did not crash. The
Right.
internet economy, and to your point, very overvalued, inefficiently run companies crashed. The internet continued, and it continued to get stronger. The late 90s saw the birth of Google, saw the birth of Amazon, and those companies are still doing extremely well today. So there may be a crash of Gen AI related companies that are overvalued, inefficiently run, and just don't have an economical model to sustain. That may happen. But generative AI and AI itself, to your point, Nathan, is only going to grow. And the difference between it and the internet is it's going to grow at a lot faster pace, as you said.
Yeah, we might give an analogy, kind of like movies aren't going away, but whether you watch them on DVDs or you stream them or you put them on Blu-ray, those mechanisms may change. But I don't think we're going to stop watching movies anytime. So,
Yeah.
so um, I liked your earlier points on asking the right questions. The idea of like, how can you use it? You don't know what you don't know. And I've even used various models, and I've just told the models, like, I've got this information. I don't know what questions to ask. What questions should I be asking? And then it gives me a list of questions about itself. And then some of them are nonsensical, but you get some nuggets of information. Like, well, that was an excellent thing I hadn't considered. And Sean, you mentioned kind of like that role playing value earlier. So a lot of that can come again from like some community driven help. You get a community of folks using AI, a community of nonprofits using AI, and talking about how you use it, how can it be improved, how is it improving things for you. I think that's also some of the big value that comes in it, which is exciting. That there's fundraising AI is the podcast out there, and there's also the groups. There's just so many resources that are out there, and then folks on this webinar are also chatting through it as well. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with that point. I mean, I think where people that get stuck on this and it's like, is it for me? Because you're not sure, like, how can this technology help me? And one of the questions was like, what are the top 2 or 3 ways? It's hard to say because there's so many different jobs in nonprofit. But if I'm a fundraiser or I'm a prospect researcher, the first thing I do is say, hey, whatever tool that you like to use, GPT, Gemini, Copilot, whatever, be like, this is what my role is. This is what I do on a daily basis. Like, how can you help me with my job? And then there will be your top 2 or 3 ways. Like, oh, well, I can assimilate all this information from a person's LinkedIn profile and tell you a bit about them, or I can role play a donor, or I can write an appeal. So there's, depending on what your your role or function is within a nonprofit, you'll have different use cases. We see a lot of appeals being written and supported, not just fully copy paste, but like augmented with AI. Saves a ton of time. And not surprisingly, many of those appeals outperform fully human written appeals because you're working with a tool that's read every single book on human psychology and consumer behavior and every case for support that's ever been posted on the internet. And they know donors and fundraising far better than you think they do. But I would say if you're looking at, tell it a bit about yourself and your role and your organization, and ask it, what are the 2 or 3 ways that you can help me the most? And I think you'd be surprised how intuitive it seems to actually know your role when you think it's just like, that it wouldn't know our nonprofit sector because it's so obscure very well.
Yeah. It can also be, encouragingly humbling, if those 2 words could be put together. Because I've seen a few times where you've got folks write things, and then you get some Gen AI to write something, and then, like you said, the Gen AI outperforms it, and you're like, well, I thought I was a great writer. And you don't want to diminish yourself. You're still a great writer, but it can hit on some things that you can't. So just to some of the very earlier points, it's another tool in your toolbox to use.
Yeah.
So. Well, we've got a whole 6 minutes left here, folks. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions in here. I'll chat for just a couple of seconds here while folks potentially maybe furiously typing away at questions. And we'll go through a couple of those. But I appreciate everyone, and Sean, Nathan, your thoughts here. on some of our prepared questions. So we've got a question for a gentleman, Boaz. It says, if there are endless ways for small nonprofits to use AI, in addition to the one maybe, Nathan, that you just mentioned, what are some maybe top 2 or 3 ways that you've seen, like what you would consider radical change with AI and Gen AI adoption?
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Radical change. One is organizations that have to deal with multilingual communities. Translation has changed drastically, where it used to take a week, maybe more, to do a translation, or you outsourced it. Now you can take any document you've got, translate it, and you're spending a few hours proofreading it, and down to different dialects as well, which has been fascinating in the nonprofit space, where they are catering to multilingual communities.
That's pretty awesome. It's pretty amazing.
I mean, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's incredible. I think, next year, well, already this year, but next year we're getting into more, generative video as well, and be able to do multilingual video, for your distinct population. Things that were just out of the realm, and from a budget perspective for nonprofits, are now fully accessible. I think creativity wins in all of that.
Awesome. Last question before we close. Are there any areas of AI use in fundraising that you guys believe is either underappreciated or untapped? Nathan, you just mentioned, like, generative multilingual videos. Anything else that you guys almost get excited to think of where it could be used next?
I doubt Nathan would disagree with me on this, and it's a cost factor and an understanding factor, but the use of traditional AI in predictive fundraising, I think, is invaluable, because now you're firing the dollars you have in very precise shots, rather than just taking a wide shotgun approach against the side of the barn. And that only helps your organization use its dollars more efficiently, but it also helps to not upset other people or fatigue people from getting asked from a variety of different organizations. If we can have organizations use that more, people are going to see less asks, but they're going to see asks that are most appropriate for them, and hopefully, push generosity in the right direction.
Yeah, I obviously concur with that, given that's my day-to-day job. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I do think there's a point, not of diminishing return, but a point where, like, Gen AI can be the gateway, like Sean said earlier, and that you realize, like, well, just creating more is not that, there's a limit to that, right? Because I don't think we as individuals want to receive 20% more emails every day, or text messages from nonprofits, or whatever it might be. That's not the answer. I think the answer is really understanding from the predictive side of who and when and how much and for what purpose and what way. That's what predictive AI does. And then match that with generative to take that and make it actionable. I mean, hopefully that's where, like, people kind of, they become aware of and accepting of AI through generative AI, as that, like, oh, this is very accessible and affordable. And then they realize, like, wow, look what more we could do by matching these two kind of similar technologies together. I think there's just tremendous potential.
Really, excuse me, really amazing stuff. All right, we're about at time, folks. I just want to say a quick thank you to Sean and Nathan for joining us and their continued work to, pursue the use of AI across the nonprofit sector. Encourage you to check out any of their resources. If you scroll up in the chat, you can see their LinkedIn profiles, and you can connect with them and ask them questions. Thanks to the Center for Civil Society for hosting this. If you attended, we'll send you a recording of the webinar as well. So if there's something insightful that you want to slow down and unpack a little bit, then you'll be certainly able to do that. Hope this has been helpful and engaging, insightful. I appreciated everyone's questions that came through, and really enjoyed this chat, both with you, Sean, and Nathan.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here. Always fun. And Sean, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. So we'll just keep on doing this.
Look forward to it, Nathan.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.